Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1062nd New Social Environment. I'm Chloe, Director of Programs at the Brooklyn Rail, and I'll be your MC today for a conversation featuring Phyllis Hattis and Phyllis Tuchman. Educated at Harvard, Phyllis Hattis studied at the Fogg Museum. In 1970, she received a Ford Foundation Fellowship to join the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco as a visiting curator. She moved to New York City in 1986, advising museums, corporations, and individual collectors and writing scholarly and critical essays for exhibition catalogs and journals. Phyllis recently authored masterpieces from the William Rubin collection, Dialogue of the Tribal and the Modern, the subject of today's conversation. And our host today, critic and art historian Phyllis Tuchman, teaches and writes about art, particularly sculpture. She has taught at Williams College, Hunter College, and the School of Visual Arts, and she is an editor-at-large for the Brooklyn Rail. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Phyllis Hattis first.
Hi, do we have the first image?
Yep.
Okay, most of you probably will recognize who these two are. Frank Stella on the right and Bill Rubin on the left. And this is to say, may we dedicate today's conversation and Zoom to the life of Frank Stella, who passed away sadly this weekend, and who leaves us, fortunately, with a wellspring of his energy and vitality and talent and genius on walls and in spaces surrounding us to see his art for decades and centuries to come, hopefully. And as the theme of my conversation today with Phyllis is about dialogues, and the theme of my book that recently came out, and looking at this photo of Bill and Frank when they were installing the first retrospective that Frank had at MoMA in 1970, when he was 30 years old, 30-something years old. And he and Bill are sitting in wheelchairs, not because he needed to, or even Bill, who eventually did sit in a wheelchair. But this was how they could work for hours and roll around in the galleries as they were hanging together. This beautiful exhibition that many of us have had the fun of seeing, and if not, knowing through the book that was the catalog of the exhibition by Bill. And a kind of Bible for Frank Stella's audiences. So there, let us praise famous men like Frank and Bill.
I'm kind of intrigued that we don't have a black painting, because Art News yesterday had an article by Alex Greenberger that was so insane about the black paintings. He was looking at the titles, and many, many years ago, Carl Andre told me that, Frank made those paintings when he was really young, and they had a ribald sense of humor. And there are girl paintings and boy paintings. And I'm just throwing that out to our audience, because if you look at the paintings, you could figure out which are the boys and which are the girls. And I know Carl told this to me at the time of Brenda Richardson's brilliant show of the black paintings at the Baltimore Art Museum. So I'm just tossing that out, because I was really upset when I read the Art News, and it was like, oh God, you're so not close to understanding these paintings. Frank had a terrific sense of humor, which you know.
Sure, but he also never stood still. And if there's too much emphasis on one aspect of his career or one series of paintings, that's myopic in my mind. He moves forward, he grows, he never stops, he never stands in one place. And his most recent beautiful, beautiful exhibition that's on at the Deitch Gallery on Worcester Street, showing these big, beautiful, uplifting, freestanding sculptural paintings is something new for everyone to see and enjoy, and realize how this is not the end of Frank Stella.
Oh my God, I love the show at Deitch so much. And I got a kick out of it because I gave it a question about how expensive they were, which maybe until last Saturday they were a bargain, but the shipping and the insurance was costly.
And installation. Yes.
Yeah, I love that. So we have some introductory photographs here from your book, which is a beautiful, beautiful volume, copiously illustrated. So Eleanor, we have two. Is Eleanor or Chloe doing the photographs? We have two great photographs of you and Bill from the book. Here you are at your wedding. And I love the personal touch in the book, which is so fabulous. And I was very lucky because when this photograph ran in Vogue magazine, I was Bill's student at the Institute of Fine Arts, and I love the idea. That must be, is that Rachel Stella, or is Rachel on the floor?
Yes, on the floor with her brother, Michael.
Brother. I mean, Michael grows up to be a doctor, a great doctor, and it's one thing, we have amazing audience of Frank and Barbara Rose and Barnett Newman. I love the crowd, but look at the art there. Adolf Gottlieb, that must be a de Kooning. The Herbert Ferber, who is still an underrated sculptor, and that is on the table. I think that's a silver David Smith Lecoq, and it's a wonderful, wonderful work. And then we're facing a Rothko, and then on the wall is a fabulous Robert Motherwell. Is that the Clifford? Yeah, that's the Clifford still. And I remember Bill telling us that Ken Nolan would sit opposite the Clifford still, and he would take a piece of paper, and he didn't like one detail of the painting, what was called the grace note. So Ken Nolan would cover up the grace note. And of course, a great Jackson Pollock. I mean, can you imagine how lucky I was to study who knew all these people and lived with this art? I mean, how lucky can you get? So,
well, and you're talking about a dialogue that Bill had with every single painting that he acquired, and that every artist who came to his loft, this was before he went to MoMA, were also having dialogue with these works of art that were handpicked by Bill. And in some ways, he had the eye of the artist, maybe even a greater eye for all of these different artists than maybe one artist would have towards another, whether it was through competition or just not wanting to see another aesthetic personality up close. But this really captures the greatness of living with art and of seeing it through Bill's eye and being in touch with the art through his dialogue. And I think we each have a dialogue to share when we're looking at works of art and experiencing them, and that's the goal.
And it's funny because of Frank's passing the other day, this photograph has been reprinted a couple times, and I really enjoyed somebody calling it an apartment. It was a loft, and it was a big deal to live in a loft in those days. I think de Kooning, you can correct me, de Kooning had a loft in that building, and later it was Larry Poons's loft.
Yeah, and Paul Jenkins was there. In any case, this was one of the first lofts, if not the first, of that was owned by a non-artist down there, even though I can see, and you can see Bill as an equivalent of an artist too. But he had an unknown architect design that loft. I don't know if you remember that, Phyllis. And his name was Richard Meyer. He was then unknown. Yeah, exactly. And he, I think, was recommended by Frank. I'm not absolutely sure, but I think so. And there's Frank at the left, sitting on the couch with Barbara Rose and Lucinda Childs and Larry Poons. And then opposite on the right side is Barnett Newman and Annalee Newman. I'm between them. And then there's Wilder Green in the background, who had been at MoMA and was an architect who worked with Philip Johnson and Mies van der Rohe on, whatever. This is history, but it's also living history, and the fun of living with art and bringing together like-minded people to experience and share conversation that matters.
Yeah, well, Richard Meyer, when took me to see their loft, Richard Meyer designed the Stella loft, which was on the other side of in the West Village. Can we have the next image, please? Now, this wasn't this on the front page of the New York Times?
Yes, this was attached to the obituary that Roberta Smith wrote about Bill when he passed away in early 2006. And this was a photo taken by Picasso's wife at the time, Jacqueline Picasso, when he had agreed to give MoMA, through Bill, the first constructed sculpture in the history of art, the first sculpture that wasn't modeled or carved, and that was part of the most important art movement of Cubism. And it was hanging at MoMA for all the years, certainly, that Bill was there. And then there was a pause, and then finally got back on the wall a few weeks ago. It's a little too high for my liking because you can't get the three-dimensionality of it, but at least it's again out there to be seen.
Oh yeah, but way before Roberta's obituary, when I was a student, this was on the front page of the New York Times.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was quite exciting.
And it should have been. And this is as big an icon, if not bigger, an icon of modernism than the Demoiselles d'Avignon that they never take down. They should, in my mind, never take this down. Not the photograph.
Oh, it's a great sculpture. And now a sequence of Picasso paintings that you live with. You live with these unbelievably wonderful Picasso paintings that are surrounded by primitive art. Can I still call it primitive art?
I don't know. I call it tribal. Most importantly, these sculptures were made by artists of a culture that was still intact. They were made for specific rituals, and they were made on the highest aesthetic level. So here on this wall that we're looking at, you see a great Picasso from 1951, a Francois Gillot drawing, flanked by these two tribal masks that were danced, one a shoulder mask on the left, very heavy, a nimba from the Baga peoples of Guinea, and on the right, a Songhai mask from the Congo. Both of all those works, I would wager, are of the same masterpiece, highest level of human achievement. And they talk to each other for lots of good reasons. And in the book, I give little cues as how to see affinities that were first brought out in Bill's exhibition 40 years ago, primitivism in 20th century art. We don't use that word anymore, even though primitivism was a used word for 14th century Italian painting, as you know. It's not strictly for African or Asian or oceanic peoples. And they are as great, as Bill said, as any Picasso at their best.
Absolutely. And the next image is just of the Picasso.
So in the book, yeah, go ahead.
No. I was going to say you must enjoy having this.
Yeah, but in the book, what I do is, Phyllis, to try and foster the dialogue between the reader and the work of art, almost as a prelude to being able to somehow get to see them in the flesh. But the idea is you see the wall and how it was installed or is installed here, a larger than specific experiencing of one work of art. And then you get into that one work of art, here framed. And then in the next image in the book, it's unframed. And then it starts going to details. But here we're showing each individual work of art on that wall as a whole. And then it's up to you to start looking at detail and get in as close as you can and experience it and have your own dialogue with
it. If we go back to the Francois Gillot painting for a second. Yeah, exactly. So this kind of strange thing happened to me in 1980, opening of Bill's Picasso retrospective. For some reason, I was standing in a gallery with a painting of Francois Gillot as a flower. And she had just dragged her friends over to see that painting. And even though it was stylized, there was no mistaking it was a portrait of Francois Gillot. And so when we look at something like this, we assume it's cubist distortions. But if we put Francois Gillot next to it, it would look just like her.
Yeah, he was a great caricaturist, right, Phyllis? And he knew how to capture the salient traits of a face and even sometimes the position of an individual, of a portrayed individual, according to the way that person sat or moved. You can identify those individuals who are being portrayed. You're right.
Yeah, no, it was like a stroke of luck. So we have now the images from Africa. We just yeah, and the next one, this incredible, and that was worn by somebody as a mask.
Yes, a shoulder mask, meaning he had, and it was a he. It's probably several hundred pounds, so you couldn't just have that and give it to just anyone to dance. But there are peepholes between the breasts to be seen, to be able to look out from. Inside there are holes in the legs that would have had a loop for a raffia skin, so you would not see the dancer's legs. And this would be a remarkable almost personality dancing in a ritual surrounded by the community. Fred Lamp, who was a contributor to our book, a noted Africanist, retired from Yale, lived in Guinea with the Baga peoples for years and did a wonderful film of that dance with the Baga, how they do it. They fall down eventually, then they get up, then they dance more. But it takes terrific strength to do so.
Wow. So I think the next image is also a Picasso head. The head is almost like a sculpture.
Definitely. It's like a plaster on a sculpture stool. And you can also read it as if he has cut off her head, and that yellow rectangle is actually based on a collar of a dress she had. But here's a perfect example of a post or a cubist drawing. It's not even post. It's done in 1937 after the onset of Cubism, but it's both a profile and a frontal view at once of a very beautiful woman who clearly tantalized Picasso and more. And there are many photos of her taken by Man Ray, another admirer. And you can see very clearly Nush's chiseled features and recognize her as distorted as she is in this painting. But those tears of her nostrils probably symbolize how she made many men feel who couldn't win her. And she, of course, was married at the time in 1937 to a surrealist poet, Paul Eluard, who was in Picasso's inner circle. And they were part of that.
I'm kind of hoping that when we finally get to see the Lee Miller movie, that she'll be one of the characters.
Absolutely.
Well, it'll be cool. So we have another wonderful image, an incredible landscape, an early Cubist landscape, again surround these ritual objects. Did you put them out yourself this way?
I believe so. I mean, we played around with different installations. Some I have kept. I think it was near that corner helmet mask of the Wabembe from the Congo, and there's some rapport between the pair of ovals, white ovals that represent the head and the cheeks, and maybe the sunset with the two discs, one reflected in water and one in the sky of the Picasso painting. And then on the right of Picasso and Bill at the moment, as we saw before, when Picasso decided to give MoMA that guitar in that photo. Of course, Bill is a lot happier looking than Picasso, but whatever. But I did move these sculptures around. This Bura or Sokoto head wasn't there. We had a different sculpture there and other sculptures there. But so some of these, I think that's one of the pairings of installation that I kept. That there are a couple others, but most of the installation has happened since Bill, but within the same vein. And there's, of course, the view of the composition and the painting without its frame. And you see how the artist frames it.
No, but this is, can we go back 1 second? Because I love how your work is framed. Did you buy it framed or did
No.
you?
Well, if we did, we changed the frame.
Okay. So Rue du Bois, I dream of eventually, the next one, I dream of finally going to Rue du Bois. I mean, it's a real place.
Yep, yep.
And Picasso landscapes, early Cubist landscapes are kind of rare, aren't they?
Well, there is a series, as most of them he kept, and most of them are in the Picasso Museum, I would say, in Paris. I'm sure the Rue du Bac, you'll be disappointed, Phyllis. It won't look like this. You won't get the feeling of coming in on a scene that you're not supposed to be witnessing, like this work follows the Demoiselle d'Avignon, a view of the brothel. And I think you get the same feeling if you look hard enough and long enough and have an experience of really seeing deeply into this, that these trees on either vertical are opening up, and you're seeing a sunset with some kind of dark creatures that are moving forward. Are they human? Are they leaves? Are they animal? And there is a kind of heart of darkness here. Conrad's heart of darkness, looking in on something that is unfamiliar.
And it seems to me the palette, the reduced palette, the greens, the ochres, it's appropriated from Picasso, having seen the great Cezanne retrospective of 7.
Yeah, I mean, these are colors he uses, reuses, relationships, opposites. They go well with the graphite and charcoal underdrawing and overdrawing and darks and lights. Picasso is a dark light painter. He works with tones and shades of light and dark more than Matisse does. If you were to see this painting in black and white, you'd be able to read it, whereas many paintings by Matisse we couldn't read.
Well, Phyllis, I'm curious about one thing. You have lots of windows, and on a beautiful day like today, I mean, it's a gorgeous blue sky, and I'm looking at feathery clouds, and I'm picturing your apartment flooded with light. So is it different living with a painting like this as opposed to seeing it in a museum with artificial lights?
Probably. I thought you were going to ask me, how do I protect the surface against all that light? But it also is framed with UF5 plexiglass. We also have UF filtered shades on the windows, so we don't see the blue sky during the day unless we do so for a moment or two. And then I have covers that I put on these when I'm away, so they don't even get daylight. But yeah, there is that intimacy, that directness, that experiencing of works of art, not only when you're alone with them, but also with daylight, no matter what the quotient of it is, that you can't have in a museum.
Fabulous. I think we have a drawing coming up.
Yep. So that's a self-portrait, according to what Picasso told Bill. And it would be great if we could zero in on that, zoom in on it. But I don't know if, Chloe, we
I don't think
beautiful. Well, good. We're not seeing the graphite overdrawing there. But Picasso once told Bill that if you see that dark beady eye and a bit of hair, not much, on the forehead or the head, the stubble of hair, that's a self-portrait. So it's literally a portrait of a goat who had died, a goat skull, and he loved animals and had pet goats. But it's also a self-portrait.
Oh my gosh. And relates to Goya, doesn't it?
It relates to what?
Goya.
Oh, well, and de Goya, absolutely. This is a work from 1951, same time as the portrait of François Gillot that you saw earlier. And he could be picturing himself at that point as someone who was being hit hard emotionally.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And now we have just an amazing, amazing vase that you own. It's very large. And
the largest.
Really? It's that large?
It's the largest sculpture he made. There's another vase similar to it, but not exactly the same and not as autobiographical for sure, and it's slightly smaller. But this one, I think, is unmatched in height from his other sculptures in ceramic, and it's a Picasso-esque amphora shape that he's created. And here is this wonderful photograph by Henri Cartier-Bresson of Matisse when visiting Théâtre, the publisher and the collector of both Matisse and Picasso, and publisher of a great journal that showed art of his time earlier and way back. But here's Matisse almost caressing the vase when he sees it supposedly for the first time, and this would be around 1951 because it's published in a book on Cartier-Bresson photographs. So I think it's a wonderful illustration of how Matisse, like Picasso, admired each other's art, and here he's clearly feeling pleasure in looking at that vase, which Théâtre had just acquired.
Can we go back 2 images to the dancer? Yeah, I mean, these remind me of Matisse's dance.
Yeah, but here the dance represents, and maybe for Matisse too, an inner state of mind. For me, Françoise is in her own trance, if not dance. She's got a castanet in her, I guess, right hand. She's looking up and back, and she's in her own zone. Picasso portrays himself 3 times as a young boy, but it's clearly Picasso trying to get her attention. And here on the right, he's standing on his hands, this young boy, with a very stern, concentrated glance to hold that posture, to say, you know, Françoise, look at me, look at me, look at me. And she's not. She's not able to loose herself from that freedom that she had at that moment to just be within herself rather than on call, as I'm sure she was 99.9% of the time living with Picasso.
Yeah, and how about the next 2 images of the instrument, playing the instrument? The next one, please.
Yeah. Yes, he's still portraying himself as a young boy, but he's getting more and more frustrated. On the left, that follows standing on his hands, and now he's playing a flute trying to get her attention, and how his body and torso reflects the blowing and the playing with his fingers of this instrument, and his body fills that well of the amphora. Still unsuccessful. And in the last image, which is on the right, it's reversed on the vase, he's letting it all hang out, and he's playing a pipe. And if you look closely, and maybe you can come in, zoom on this, and see that he's actually crying. And to see these tears rolling down his eyes, you wouldn't picture Picasso crying.
I love it. Now I think we have obviously a photograph of Matisse that just an incredible Matisse that you own.
Yes, it's deceptively sophisticated, maybe to a passerby. They might say, "Oh, that's just a bourgeois Matisse portraying a woman, maybe in front of a mirror with her reflected image to her left." But when you look very intently and you have more of that dialogue with it and experiencing it, you start to see how many sophisticated dialogues are going on within the painting. So we're looking first head on a direct image of Lydia de Lektorskaya, the woman who comes to work with him about the time this painting is painted in 1935, and stays with him, saves his life in 1941. And thanks to her, we have the cutouts. And then she stays with him for the rest of his life and runs his studio. And I think is his great late love. So here he is, just plumbing her, seeing who is she in a frontal image, and on the reflected image, which you can't get if you're looking realistically at it. The reflected image is in profile at the left of the same figure, and on the first to the right, the direct image, she's accessible, she's beautiful, she's there for him and unguarded. On the left, she's looking at him out of the corner of her eye with a very wiry contour as opposed to the soft open contours of her frontal image, and saying to the artist, "Watch out, you know, I'm not that accessible, stay away." A kind of stubborn, willful side of this Siberian-born woman dedicated to Matisse and his art. When you look even closer, you realize that the figure on your left is bigger than the figure on your right. The reflected image is bigger than the direct image. Now that's obviously counter realistic, as well as then seeing all these arabesques and then the straight lines complementing each other both pictorially and in terms of color. Complementary green, apple green to a flamingo pink, a rust red of her hair and of the chair behind her to the green. And it goes on and on. So there, and the light darks of her robe, and the way he distinguishes and moves these figures to being interlocked and of one and the same being.
How about the Barnett Newman in the background?
Yeah, absolutely, those zips.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so the next image is a surprise, and it doesn't say who made the work of art on the left yet. And oh no, you brought up too soon. I mean, I couldn't figure it out. I was kind of astonished when I saw this. It's so large and so unusual and so related to Matisse of the 30s, where we haven't mentioned you lent the woman reflected in the mirror to the big show in Philadelphia of Matisse in the 30s.
Right, where they have the original Matisse that Warhol on your left here was mesmerized by and painted his version of, larger, more wall size, flatter, with different tones of blues and reds and blacks and black on black and mustard yellow in order to make it more Warhol than Matisse. But here was an artist who said, "I want to be Matisse." And he was able to make a painting that, although he's often considered a postmodernist, he hangs very comfortably in our spaces with the modernist masters.
kind of astonishing. You must be amazed. And it has like a flat surface.
Yeah.
It's
And I have to say, remembering Frank today, that when Frank would look at that painting, he would say, that's a tricky painting. Because of everything you're saying. It looks like Matisse, but it isn't.
And the next painting is amazing. This is one of the just really great Dubuffets that you see in a private collection. It's stunning.
And my story is that he was walking through the Tuileries Gardens in 1949 and probably saw one of the entertainers, a man with a three-piece suit shown by these two little buttons on his belly or chest, and playing and talking to pigeons and gathering around him these parents with their young children. And that Dubuffet might have been one of those young boys and girls gathered around such an entertainer around 1910, when he was the right age to have done that. And to then see it again, still going on after World War II in 1949, that I think he went back to his studio to try to paint what he remembered seeing and feeling as a child. And therefore, if he's a little boy looking up at this weird experience of an entertainer sometimes kissing pigeons and holding pigeons without injuring them and without their wanting to leave. And here's this head of the entertainer, much bigger than the body, and he's below the head by far, and also striving to make a modernist surface that is unlike any precedented surfaces. So he starts with the color that's under this gessoed plaster surface, when wet, drawn upon with maybe the back of his brush, and then drawn over that with charcoal. So again, it's both a child's drawing and a child's painting, but by 1949, Picasso was a very sophisticated painter. I mean, Picasso, Dubuffet, and could have certainly made a Dubuffet painting that was recognizable for the art that he had already made. So here he's going out on a limb to do something that's even more adventurous than what he was working on prior.
How about mustache?
Yeah, that charcoal mustache. Yeah, I'm sure the entertainer had it and fascinated this little boy. It was probably very, very invasive.
I love it. So I remember seeing this narrow panel at the Giacometti retrospective at the Centre Pompidou. And this is just amazing that you own something that was taken off the wall. Here we have a sense of scale. Something that was removed from the wall of Giacometti's studio.
By him. And it was important. It was pivotal in his career. It was very important. It was his first life-size standing woman that he was able to finally get big enough from the little figurines that he made before and during the very early part of World War II. So he struggled, but achieved it in this painting, which was made at the same time as he was making a plaster of the figure. But that plaster still had more residue of the surrealist art of his pre-war styles. And eventually he does these standing women with their hands pinned to their hips that can be life-size or even larger than life-size, as well as smaller, but they're much more considered human images than his pre-war surrealist imagery. So we were lucky in getting this from the brother of Alberto Bruno, the architect, who knew Bill and knew his role in Giacometti's life and how close they were when they were both in Paris and talking into the wee small hours of the night in the La Coupole restaurant. I can just imagine the two of them could never stop talking. They were both talkers. Yeah.
We have just the painting isolated, the next one.
Mm-hmm. Well, this remarkable dialogue was graphically depicted by, really, there's only one graphic designer who could have done this book, and that's Stephen Schoenfelder, and we should have mentioned him before we said anything else. Stephen Schoenfelder was able to put the graphic design into action, his own graphic design that allowed us to have these dialogues. And in the focus of the pairing with the Giacometti is this African funereal figure of East Africa, of the Giriama people of Kenya, what's called memorial portrait figure. But there's something there that you can see in relation to each other. It's certainly not necessarily immediate, but there are lots of ways, even with the obvious, the wood, and then this figure of a man probably, but because of his weathering on the right, you feel like he's in constant conversation. And there's something with the Giacometti that also, with the round mouth, it could be that that figure is talking with them, they're talking with each other. But there are certain ways that the lengths of these figures are broken up with anatomical details and the arms pinned to the side in both cases. It's just, you can read through your experiencing, your individual experiencing, how these works of art can be seen as relatives. Well, okay, so the caption for that, okay, we're a little off.
We want the photograph, please.
Okay, but the caption for this photograph is wrong, so don't look at that. This is a 1908 snapshot photograph of Picasso in his studio with his tribal art that he was collecting in 1908, and it's photographed by Gillette Burgess, the limnerist for the New Yorker, who had entree to Picasso because he was doing an article on the wild men of Paris, and Picasso was certainly the key beast of the group. And it's with a snapshot camera, one of the first, and this is the original. It's often reproduced, but this is the original. And thanks to Francis Naumann, who may be on listening, I was able to buy it and give it to Bill on one celebration or another.
What a great gift.
Yeah, thank you, Francis.
And here is just one of your Stellas.
Yeah, but by far the most remarkable, the most monumental, the greatest. And it's a painting from his interlace, some called protractor series, from 1968. That painting is 56 years old and it looks as fresh as new. It's 9 feet by 18 feet, and it's a wall. And when Bill moved in, he owned this painting. Well, even before he moved in, he hired an architect then an unknown architect who's now well-known, Todd Williams, to design the apartment that was then raw space. And he had that wall designed for this painting, which he had acquired shortly before he moved from his loft, which we saw earlier, uptown to where we now are on East 58th Street.
It's stunning. And how about that palette?
Yep. And that's with fluorescent paints. Those pinks still fluoresce. The yellow, a little bit less, the green to some extent. But, you know, this is 56 years old. So some of the fluorescence has, I think, died a little bit, but some is still very, very bright. It's still beautifully calibrated and balanced.
Now, the next image is really, again, a memorial. I was
Absolutely.
devastated by the loss of Richard Serra.
Yeah. So here's to Richard Serra's art, and that will continue to live on too. And in our memory of a great artist and a determined human being who didn't take no for an answer and produced what is in the end greatness. That's a paint stick drawing that has a sculptural character to it. You feel like you're looking into one of his elliptic arches and sculptures that you can walk into and through. Very beautiful.
Exactly. And the next one is just a superb print. It's like by the master printmaker of the 20th century.
Yeah, Jasper Johns. It appropriates in the upper right corner a wonderful lithograph by Barnett Newman. And we own an impression of that, which maybe you'll show. And it's inscribed to Bill. And this is a funny little anecdote I can tell to all of you while we're looking for that. I hope it was one of the slides that we kept, but whatever, in the upper right is Johns's version of a great lithographs by Barnett Newman that was inscribed to Bill, to my friend Bill, with affection, Barney. And Bill told me, if you ever have to sell that, you should erase the inscription. That's Bill, the modest man, not knowing that that inscription would probably make it more desirable rather than less.
Are those or OHR vessels on the left?
In the lithograph, you mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. The one on the right, I know, was the Jubilee vessel that was commemorating Queen Elizabeth's Jubilee. And so if you look at it you look at the negative of that vase or that trophy, you see the profile of Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth on one side and Philip on the other.
I love it. Now we have, it's funny, multimedia. We have a Matisse sculpture, and we have this little one, but this one, I think Helen Frankenthaler owned the same one.
Huh. Could be. I don't remember.
Yeah. And I think we have another view of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable walking around this sculpture.
Yeah. Louise Smith, a wonderful trustee of MoMA, owned one and gave it to MoMA. So MoMA has one. It's, of course, a cast of, I believe, 9. And this particular cast came from Pierre Matisse, the son and the dealer of Henri. But if you look at it very carefully, I keep seeing the opposite of what Gertrude Stein spoke of Matisse as being someone who needed the model and therefore was 19th century, as compared with Picasso, who had the model in his mind's eye when he was painting. But of course, he also drew Jacqueline many times in front of him and painted her in front of him, and Françoise and all the other women whom he was living with or with. But here you realize how much Matisse takes triangles and angles to juxtapose to each other, the pointed breast to balance the sway back hips and buttocks. And I mean, this is not the model whom he was drawing in a studio.
Exactly. And now I think we're getting to the end. Look at this mask.
Yeah. So that beautiful Punu mask, which is, in fact, I don't know if you can see it. I'm looking at Phyllis T, not at myself, but it's in fact next to me in this dining room or nearby, overlooking the cityscape. And this is one of those beautiful Asian featured masks that were made by the Punu peoples in Gabon, or probably Gabon, but they crossed different borders. And though it looks very Japanese, according to what I understand, the Japanese hadn't yet really come into Africa through trade routes or anything, but it was an image of beauty. And the idea was that the artist should make the most beautiful image of womanhood to be danced. And it turned out they saw the Asian features as being those, and they are. It is a very beautiful image.
Stunning. And that brought us to the end, where we began.
So we celebrate you, both Phyllis and everyone listening, and Frank and Bill, who had a dialogue for ever since Frank was probably even still at Princeton, but throughout Bill's life, 40 years, 45 years, and that dialogue goes on, continues through us.
We haven't talked about how Bill began as with a MATA show at the Museum of Modern Art way back when. And can you mention the topic of your PhD dissertation, which I'm fascinated by?
Right. So Bill wrote on Mata, and I'm just going to pull, if I find it so easily, yes, what MoMA catalogs were like then. Here is this little stapled catalog on Mata from a show that Bill did before he became the curator there in 1957. He went to MoMA in 1967, so 10 years later. But I did my doctoral dissertation on Ingres, who was a pupil of David in early 19th century, and many students probably think of him as being very linked to the classical and opposite of Delacroix, who was considered not only a romantic, but much more modernist to some extent. But I looked at Ingres as the modernist. And so I saw it as the development of modernism, pitted him between John Flaxman, the English linear draftsman and artist, and David, who was obviously still teaching his pupils to make the three-dimensional image on the two-dimensional surface, whether oil or paper. So I had a wonderful time seeing Ingres as a precursor of modernism, or even an early practitioner of modernism. And I think you can find it in his relief images rather than three-dimensional.
Absolutely. Phyllis, I want to thank you. And now we're opening it up to questions.
Thank you, Phyllis.
And you spelled name correctly.
Right.
Thank you, Phyllis and Phyllis, for this conversation. We have a few questions, and so the first question is going to be from GE. GE, I'll give you the chance to unmute to ask.
Thank you so much, Chloe, and thank you, Phyllis and Phyllis. When William Rubin made his choices, he seemed to have this great confidence in distinguishing between major works and, of course, other works. What was the source of his ranking and the source of the idea by which he ranked them? And was any of it influenced by his time with Meyer Shapiro? Thank you.
You're talking about Bill, right?
Yes. Yes, I am.
Yeah. I'm sure it was affected by his being a very involved student of Meyer. I don't think choices directly were even discussed by Meyer and I think they were more theoretical and more intellectual. Now, when Bill began, he wasn't collecting Picasso and Matisse. He was collecting the art of his time and the abstract expressionists primarily. He did buy an early Miro, and he did buy some other works that I think he bought with his parents' money, but he was collecting and engaged with the art of the abstract expressionists with Rothko and Newman and the artist Pollock. And he never met Pollock, but he was very engaged with his art and owned a great Pollock that Phyllis showed you in that photo that eventually, sadly, it's still in Tehran. It was sold to Shabana, the wife of the Shah, and it's very coveted by even the mullahs in Iran today, who won't sell it to whoever at whatever.
Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, GE. Phyllis, the last question today is going to be from Fong. Fong, I'll give you the chance to unmute to ask.
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Phyllis.
Thank you, Fong.
It's wonderful. I read the whole book when I first got it a month ago. And so I have two questions. I have many, but I just allow me to ask two. One is that what was Bill's relationship, Mr. Rubin relationship to James Sobey, whom he dedicated the Dada Surrealism, book to?
Well, Sobey was at MoMA before Bill. He would have known him, met him. I don't know when Sobey left MoMA. I don't remember offhand. They may have overlapped, but I know Bill admired Sobey's eye. Sobey was a great collector as well as a wonderful curator of MoMA and originator of exhibitions and catalogues. And I think he was the one who did the early show of African art at MoMA in 1935. Yeah. So he was in some ways a model for Bill. I mean, so too was Barr and Rene Donencourt. The people of MoMA, when Bill came on board, were pretty great. So he was learning from them.
Yeah. I just came back from Venice a week ago, where I saw the Kunin show in relationship to Venice, two trips he made in 59 and 69. And
must have been great.
It was great, Phyllis. It was great. But in thinking about de Kooning admiration to Picasso, in that they seem to be embody a restless personality and spirit. Every time they achieve a certain high style, they abandon it in order to undertake some other style. And in thinking about Frank Stella's beautiful essay dedicated to Bill, where he say, "One life, twice live." So there's a Bill Rubin, the art historian par excellence. He wrote extensively, he taught, and then there's an art lover who managed to become a great curator. So there's certain kind of deep infinity to that restlessness. So would you say few words about that? Greater
Absolutely.
depth, and because since you live with him forever.
Absolutely. Well, Phong, as the artist in you, and you carry it throughout all dimensions of your life and work. And it's an honor for me to even get to know you and to be part of your big embracing enterprise of bringing people together and art to our fore. I think Picasso and Frank and Bill all had something deeply in common that was essential to making art. And you have it, and you know it. It's that ability to take risks, to not be satisfied with where you are at any given moment, to push yourself one step further. And that was Bill's character too. And I think certainly Frank had it.
Mhm.
And Bill and Frank pushed each other in ways in this wonderful journey that Frank wrote about. And that coupled with both of their and your passion for all that you see and do and make, that passion combined with knowledge and risk taking and experience, visual experience, it all blends together into one whole. And that's what makes you who you are, Frank who he was, Bill who he was. And if we can all have some of that, we who we are.
Wow, thank you. Well, can I have one more question? Is that okay? The show 2001, when MoMA was undergoing, the renovation, it was temporary moved to Queen, and where Bill, Mr. Rubin, and Kurt Vanderdoe team up and co-curate the show.
Excuse me, Fawn, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Not at all. No, I can re-question again quickly.
Thank you.
When MoMA was in temporary space in Queen, Mr. Rubin and Kurt Vanderdoe actually might have been also John Elderfield, who in the mix did that show. It's called Face Off, so Picasso and Matisse. And I was wondering what his relationship with Vanderdoe. I know that Vanderdoe may have studied with Albert Elson at Stanford, but you must have known that intimacy of their friendship. Can you share with us?
Yes. So Bill was looking for the right successor for him. He felt he was no longer fascinated as he needed to be with the art that was being made downtown, and that his studio visits could be wonderful, but he wasn't scouring the field like he did earlier, and that he needed someone younger to take his place. And this was in 1988. He still had his Picasso Brock Pioneering Cubism exhibition that was in the works. And then 1996, the big Picasso and portraiture show. He was still attached to MoMA, but he didn't want to be head of the department. He didn't want to have to write a lot of memos. He had finished that, And our daughter, who was born and was just, sort of a spark of light and life in our lives, he wanted more time with her. And as his life turned out to be shorter than he might have wanted, it was great that he was at home a lot and freed to do the writing and work that he wanted to do. So he was looking for someone to replace him who would, and his criterion were that that person should know the market, should speak French, and should protect the collection.
Yeah.
That means not deaccession, works that should not be deaccessioned.
Yeah.
And he thought about the options, and he consulted his friend L. Elson, who was the professor of Kirk. I think Al must have strongly recommended Kirk, and Bill chose Kirk. Sadly, Kirk also had a short life, too short a life. But, Kirk filled the criteria that he felt were important.
Yeah.
Is that what you're sort of?
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah.
Because I admire Kurt writing also, and the way that he can talk about art as eloquent as Mr. Rubin was. So it's thank you so much, Phyllis.
Thank you, Fawn.
Thank you. Back to you, Chloe.
Thank you. Phyllis, has she left? I think Phyllis has left, but
Yeah, she had an appointment.
she has to go on a plane to
Yeah.
St.
Right.
Louis.
Thank
But
you.
I'm here if anybody else wants to ask any questions, but up to you.
Thank you, Fong, for those questions. And thank you, G, as well for your question. I think that concludes today's Q&A. So I just want to give one more thank you to Phyllis and Phyllis. And thank you to Drew as well for helping prepare the images for today. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art, who sponsor our new social environment program and make daily conversations like this one possible. They also support our archive, where you can view this video and others on the Rail's YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 23 years. A donation directly supports our writers, our staff, and our operations. You can support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're free tomorrow at 1 p.m., join us for a conversation presented with our friends at the Vera List Center for Art and Politics, Revisiting Studies into Darkness, Open Letter in the Dark. You can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so, so much for joining us today, and see you soon, I hope.
Thank you, Chloe.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Phyllis.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Vertigo.
Phyllis. Thank you,
Vertigo
Phyllis.
is
Phyllis.
incredible.
Thank you. Congratulations. And
Thank you to
make
both
sure
Phyllises.
Thank
go
you,
buy the book, you guys.